individuals in any serious way with regards to tax liability. Thank you, sir, and I maintain my amendment.
All those in favour of adopting the appel is called for, I invite members to return to their seats. If members have had the opportunity of returning to their seats, then I ask the greffier to open the voting. For all members who wish to vote have voted, I ask the greffier to close the voting. The amendment is adopted. 34 votes pour, 2 votes contre, no abstentions.
2, please, sir.
2 votes.
Deputy Southern and Deputy Mezek voted contre.
Very well. We now come on to the next amendment, which is lodged by Deputy Mezek of St Helier, entitled Draft Budget Statement 2017, Amendment 3. I ask the greffier to read that proposition.
Page 2, after paragraph D, insert the following new paragraph. E. To agree in principle that from January 2018, owners' rates for residential properties should no longer be a tax-deductible expense for landlords when calculating the income taxable under Schedule A, and to direct the Minister for Treasury and Resources to bring forward the necessary changes to the Income Tax Jersey Law 1961 for consideration by the Assembly during 2017.
Deputy.
Thank you, sir. Can I start by thanking the staff in the Treasury Department who were incredibly helpful when I wanted to formulate this amendment and gave me the information I needed to do so, and that they were very helpful. Can I also thank the Treasury Minister, who will, after this, be proposing an amendment to my amendment, which I do consider enhances what I'm trying to do, and so I will support that. I had initially considered including what he is suggesting in my initial amendment, but I wasn't 100% sure what the politics of that would be in this Assembly, so I took the cautious side and decided not to, but I'm glad to see that that has been brought up instead, and I will support that. I will be brief in just explaining the rationale behind this. This occurred to me when I spoke to somebody who had recently become a landlord, and we were talking about our tax returns we were doing at the same time, and he brought up the fact that this was the first tax return he was having to do since becoming a landlord and thus starting to receive extra income from that investment property, and he'd simply found it quite surprising that he was able to deduct his payment of parish rates as a business expense on that property, whereas, of course, if you're renting a property, you don't have the option of deducting your parish rates from your income tax, or if you own a property that you occupy, you also don't get that ability. And I thought that to me was a little bit strange, because at the end of the day, housing is a social good, and the sort of rules in terms of how we allow people to become investors in that market when it's not a market that people have any choice to be a part of. We all need to be a part of it because we need a roof over our heads. The sort of morality underpinning the regulations that underpin that market, I think sort of sometimes have different principles when we're talking purely about consumer goods instead. And so I simply wanted to put it to the Assembly that for what is another tax, for these people, that it would not be right to allow them to deduct that as a business expense. There are plenty of other legitimate things that could count as business expenses, whether it's renovating a property or having to deal with damage done to it. But we all have to pay parish rates for the properties we reside in, and if it's not deductible for tenants and people who own the properties they live in, then perhaps for these people it should also not be something that could be exempted. And of course the amendment is to include commercial properties in that, and I think many of those same principles can apply to that as well. And so I offer that to the Assembly to cast a verdict on, but I happen to think it's a good idea, and I hope members will as well, and so I make the amendment, sir.
The amendment seconded? Does any member wish... Oh, I beg your pardon. There is an amendment to the amendment lodged by the Minister for Treasury and Resources, and therefore I ask the greffier to read that amendment.
Page 2, new paragraph E, for the words owners' rates for residential properties, substitute the words rates paid by the owner of a property under the Rates Jersey Law 2005.
Minister.
Thank you, sir. I find myself, sir, in somewhat uncharted territory, although I'm delighted...
Pause for a moment, and we express our gratitude to the Senator Farnham for his contribution to the charities.
Sir, I was, if it hadn't been so obvious, going to point it out just to be even-handed with the Constable of St Saviour's yesterday. But Senator Farnham was very fast coming forward, so there we go. Sir, I was, before I was so rudely interrupted, I was...
Well, it's always a relief to know members are prepared to police each other. It makes the chair's job a lot easier.
Always glad to be helpful, sir. I was trying to point out, sir, that I feel somewhat in uncharted territory on the grounds that effectively I'm in a position where I'm broadening an amendment being brought by Deputy Mezak. And I'm, in this case, delighted to be doing so. He has laid out the rationale, and I found it curious in a sense that he was concerned about, I think he was saying, going too far in his amendment, which is why he limited it in the way that he did. But frankly, we looked at the situation and thought that actually he's right. And to be fair, we have as one of our 5 principles of taxation fairness, and where possible we can accommodate. I think it's therefore right to do so. I'd like to just make a few other comments, if I may. At the moment, owner's rates are a tax-deductible expense, as has been pointed out, and that's the case under the income tax law. Some other jurisdictions do not allow property rates as a tax-deductible expense. Indeed, that includes Guernsey, which deducts property rates when calculating the Guernsey income tax. They don't allow that. I'm grateful that the Deputy has also brought this as an in-principle type of amendment, giving time to Treasury to prepare the necessary legal changes for next year's budget. That is a very reasonable approach to take, and I thank him for that. It certainly makes life a lot easier. An approach that is necessary to bring this into effect at Budget 18 does require a comprehensive set of rules which need to be addressed, and all possible circumstances need to be considered. So that's why there is a degree of complex drafting involved with making changes of this nature. I should also say that based on the low level of rates charged in the island, the impact of the Deputy's amendment is estimated to be approximately £300,000 per annum, which equates to around about £30 of income tax per rented out property. I think it's useful just to put that into context. I'm aware, sir, that the public would like to see the business sector contributing more to tax revenues. So I have proposed, and that's the basis of this amendment to the amendment, that it extends the Deputy's amendment beyond just residential property to encompass as well commercial property. So my amendment to this amendment raises an extra £300,000. Again, the additional state's revenue is relatively limited because of the low property rates charged in the island, relatively low property rates charged in the island. The average additional income tax from my amendment is estimated to less than £100 per commercial property per year. As opposed to the stamp duty change proposed earlier by Deputy Renouf that we have already debated, this change is considered to be so small that it would not impact on the competitive position in any shape or form. So I make the amendment and ask members to consider whether they would like to extend the amendment of Deputy Mezak in the way that I have described to include commercial properties on the basis that the impact is relatively low, and it does appear to me to be a fair approach to take to include commercial properties as well as residential. I hope members will support it. Thank you, sir. I maintain the amendment.
Is the Minister's amendment seconded? Yes. Does any member wish to speak on the Minister's amendment?
Sir, just to declare an interest, and I will not be participating in this debate.
Well, Deputy Sutherland.
Yes, sir, and the Treasury Minister just mentioned the 5 principles of taxation, and we started with 3 yesterday, and I think I extended it to 4. Could he just remind us what the 5 principles are of taxation?
Any other member wish to speak on the Minister's amendment? No. The Minister.
Yes, low, broad, simple and fair. I think there might have been an addition there. It was 4. Thank you, Deputy, for pointing out the error.
So, just on a not a point of order, but a point of clarification. One Connaught Harbour has declared an interest. Obviously, we also have our register of interests, and I imagine this is affecting a large class of people, of which there are a number of landlords in the Assembly, of which I am one. So, just as one member has risen, but as in budget debates, we have a rule that is, if it attacks a large group of people, then we don't make an individual declaration. But if it's necessary, so I will do so.
No, I think in these circumstances,
I won't withdraw,
this is an amendment which would extend to a large category of individuals, and therefore it's not something that would create a conflict in a member here voting one way or another.
And even in so, we're worse off, sir.
Well, that depends if we're going to vote for it or against it, Senator, I suppose. Those in favour of adopting the Minister's amendment, kindly show. Those against? Very well, the amendment is adopted. We now return to the debate on Deputy Mezek's amendment as amended. Does any member wish to speak on Deputy Mezek's amendment? The Deputy Mr. Mary.
Thank you, sir. I again declared I have a slight interest in it. I do. I'm a landlord of a small property here. I have concerns on 2 points arising this proposition, which both stem from the one set of principles, which is that arrangements have already been made on the basis that the allowance is to be granted. My immediate concern is that if this allowance is not available to landlords, then it will simply be passed on to the tenants. That is my principal concern. Secondly, on behalf of the landlords, they will have made certain financial commitments, possibly going as far back as acquisition of the property concerned, mortgage arrangements, and more particularly the present tenancy arrangements, which anticipate that the allowance will still be available, and they will be disadvantaged if this proposition is passed. I do ask that if the proposition is approved, would the Minister agree to look into the situation and continue to apply the allowance to those people who are already committed for a longer period than is covered by the proposition, i.e. it is possible that a landlord may have entered into agreement now for, say, 5 years. That agreement might well anticipate a cost of living index increase in rent, but would not apply to the rates. I would simply ask that the Treasury Minister agree to be accommodating to those landlords by allowing pre-existing arrangements to continue. But on the basis that the proposition does have unfortunate consequences, particularly for the tenant, I propose to oppose the proposition.
Any other member? Deputy Lewis.
Thanks, sir. I find it difficult to support this proposition. Commercial properties are run as businesses often, even a portfolio of domestic properties. And those groups of properties have an expense to run them. They are only taxed on their profits. And at the moment we tax people that own property, their income at 20%, whether they be resident or not. So it's simply an expense against running that property, which then fuels public services and provides the services that you need in the area to run those properties, whether it be emptying the waste carts or whatever. So it's simply an expense that should be deducted from your income tax. I don't understand why we should change that at all, because we're already taxing people on the profits of those incomes. So I find this quite difficult to support. And also, some landlords will simply increase their rents to cover it. It's an expense that they will be incurring. So I think it's a perfectly legitimate expense to put on a tax form against a property income, as it always has been. So I find it difficult to understand why the Treasury Minister would support this on the basis of how it's been done for many, many years. Expenses against properties incurring income are taxed at 20%, as they should be, and I don't see why this shouldn't be allowed as an expense. Thank you, sir.
Does any other member wish to speak? Another member? Senator McLean.
Sir, I just thought I ought to address, as I can, the point raised, or the point in particular by the Deputy of St Mary's. First and foremost, this is, of course, an in-principle decision. We've got to work up the detail, and it's for budget 18, so this is not coming into immediate effect. I would also point out that the numbers are relatively low, as I suggested earlier on, and in fact the true impact of this, in fact it's the reverse of what Deputy Andrew Lewis was saying a moment ago. The impact would be 20% of the rate, so it's 20% of the rate is the element that would be in effect the impact, which is again a very small amount. So I would say that over the period of time, Treasury will look at the issues, and certainly I've noted the points made by the Deputy of St Mary's as the legislation is developed over the coming 12 months for Budget 18. Thanks, sir.
Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment? I call upon Deputy Mezek to respond.
Thank you, sir. There is very little, I think, that can be added to the comments that were just made by the Treasury Minister. I'm sure he's as glad as I am to be taking a collaborative approach to this, and long may that continue when it's evident we have so much in common on our tax policies when we're committed to at least one of those 4, 5, or is it 6 principles behind taxation. And I did work out the amount, is that the amount of extra tax on average that will be paid by landlords per month is £2.50. £2.50. I don't know who's going to go through the cost of administration fees with their estate agents to get rent increased by £2.50. The admin will probably be 100, maybe 200 quid to get that done. Seems a bit too much effort for just £2.50. So I don't agree that it will be passed on to tenants when it's such a small amount like that. And so I ask for the appel, please, sir.
Appel is called for. Invite members to return to their seats. I ask the greffier to open the voting. If members have had the opportunity of casting their votes, I ask the greffier to close the voting. The amendment is adopted. 32 votes pour, 2 votes contre, 1 abstention.
Those voting contre, Deputies Andrew Lewis and the Deputy of St Mary, and the Constable of St. 1 abstained.
Very well, we now come to the Fourth Amendment, which is that lodged by Senator Ferguson, and it's entitled the Draft Budget Statement 2017, Amendment 5, and I ask the greffier to read the proposition.
Page 2, after paragraph D, insert the following new paragraph, E. To agree in principle that from 2018, a 20% tax on profit should be applied to all large retail businesses operating in Jersey, whether owned by Jersey resident companies or by non-resident companies, where taxable profits are above GBP 500,000 per annum, providing this does not pose a risk to the 010 regime, and to direct the Minister for Treasury and Resources to bring forward the necessary legislative changes for debate by the Assembly during 2017.
Senator.
Thank you, sir. I will make no apologies for a quick look at the background of this, because I think that most members in this Assembly now were not here at the time when the original 010 came in. It started with the implementation of the 010 policy. All the Crown dependencies recognised the inequity of the position with regards to overseas companies trading in the islands, but they felt powerless to do anything about it at that time. There were 3 fairly comprehensive scrutiny reports which discussed the matter. It was recognised that a Jersey branch of a UK company, the full profits would be taxable in the UK as soon as they're earned. But in the case of a UK group with a Jersey subsidiary, the subsidiary will pay no tax in Jersey, and the group would only pay tax when its profits are paid to the UK parent as a dividend. A dividend would attract tax, so there's a strong incentive to avoid receiving dividends from Jersey subsidiaries. the profits could be reinvested tax-free, either in Jersey or elsewhere in the group, or extracted by way of a loan to the parent group. For instance, there is a large department store in the island, which is actually, when I last looked, owned through a Luxembourg subsidiary. For businesses owned outside the UK, the treatment would vary, but it does seem likely that a Guernsey company would be able to avoid or postpone for a long time any tax on its Jersey operations. Off-island owned trading companies will pay no Jersey tax, and therefore they will be able to avoid or delay paying tax elsewhere. This gives them an unfair advantage over locally owned businesses. And it also means that Jersey businesses will be more valuable to off-island investors than they are to Jersey residents. And it gives a tax advantage, as I've said, to off-island investors, which would excuse me, only accelerate the current trend for Jersey businesses to be sold to non-Jersey investors. All pretty prescient, I would say. In SR 14/2007, the Corporate Services Scrutiny Subpanel followed up one of the major concerns identified in its reports, this fact that non-Jersey owned businesses would escape tax liability in Jersey. The panel and their advisor adapted a proposal originally submitted by Juret Blompe, the Blompe proposal, for a tax on owner-occupied business property as a workable solution. The Treasury Resources Minister acknowledged that the proposal had some merit and agreed to investigate the economic impact and the potential yield. The result was the draft income tax amendment number 32, Jersey Law 2000, which was lodged on the 21st of October 2008. As a result of the various elections to panels and ministerships following the election, an agreement was reached between the Minister and the Scrutiny Panel that after the legislation had been reviewed by the new panel, it would be debated. The debate was scheduled for March 2009. The new Minister and the Scrutiny Panel adhered to that agreement, and the then current Corporate Services Panel presented their report to the States. The panel was greatly disappointed that no substantive work had been done by the Treasury concerning the implications of the comments made by the panel in 2008. And it appeared that the onus had been put on scrutiny to justify the progression or lack thereof of this piece of legislation. Certainly, the panel has received no evidence of further consultation, and apart from some indicative work done by the Tax Department, there's no detailed evidence to support the Minister's reluctance to introduce the deemed rental amendment. The conclusion was that there were two main issues inherent in the proposal. The first was that all businesses profiting from their activities in Jersey should contribute to the island. This is eminently fair. And the second issue was that of equity between non-finance local and foreign-owned trading companies. This question of equity for local businesses remains extremely important and must be addressed. It still goes on. The panel was of the opinion that the deemed rental concept had much to commend it, but it did depend on the availability of the information. The biggest problem, as was pointed out by the Comptroller of Taxation, was that the information was difficult to access and was incomplete. And as most comptrollers, sir, are only too happy to collect as much tax as possible, I must consider that his regret over this was absolutely genuine. The Treasury estimated that 010 proposals would cost the island 10 to 12 million in lost tax revenue from foreign-owned non-finance companies. The department also estimated that this was at the time of the report. The department also estimated that the deemed rent tax would recover about half that sum, some £4 to £6 million. So, for nearly 10 years, we have had a tax policy which is incredibly inequitable for local businesses and encourages local owners to sell out to foreign firms. I can't blame them, but it would be nice if we retained some local ownership of local businesses. And all we have done is wring our hands and say, woe is me, or whatever is the political equivalent. In the meantime, the Isle of Man produced a Tesco tax in 2013, and Guernsey produced an amendment to their budget legislation in October 2015. And all we hear is words, not deeds. I ask the Assembly to support me in this amendment so that we can start producing deeds, not just words.
Is the amendment seconded? Yes, sir. Does any member... excuse me, there's an amendment to the amendment, I think, isn't there? Yes, there's an amendment to the amendment lodged by the Minister for Treasury and Resource. I ask the greffier to read that amendment.
Page 2, in new paragraph E, for the words 20%, substitute the words higher rate of. After the words applied to, delete the words all large. And for the words taxable profits are above GBP 500,000 per annum, substitute the words annual taxable profits exceed a certain threshold, which is to be determined during 2017.
Minister.
Thank you very much, sir. I have already said publicly on many occasions so far that we are considering broadening the scope of companies that pay tax in Jersey. I am actively looking for a way to tax the profits of larger retail businesses. At the moment, such businesses in Jersey are, of course, zero tax rated, whether they are locally or non-locally owned. In making any changes, we have to protect the internationally compliant status of the island's 010 corporate tax regime. That means not discriminating between locally and non-locally owned businesses. So any taxation, just to emphasize the point, or any changes to the corporate taxation regime requires that both locally and non-locally businesses are treated exactly the same. It does mean that most companies and most profits must be taxed. The 010 regime states and makes it absolutely clear that the majority of companies and the majority of profits must be taxed at the zero rate to maintain that compliance. Now, the wording of the Senator's amendment is very specific. It is a copy, in fact, of the retail tax introduced in Guernsey in 2016. And although the tax models used by Guernsey, and for that matter the Isle of Man, are useful starting points, they might not be appropriate for Jersey, as our finance sectors differ in a number of different ways. If we are to make a properly informed decision about how to broaden our tax base, we need to first be in a position to gather evidence on company profits. We need to know how many companies and what percentage of profits are taxed at zero compared to those taxed at 10% and 20%. Now, we've already started, sir, gathering this evidence. In fact, the process started long before the Senator lodged her proposition. So this is something that's been in train and is ongoing, and it resulted from the fact that we made changes to the 2015 corporate income tax return form to allow us to collect the information necessary from companies. And by exchanging also information with the Jersey Financial Services Commission. You can't get, sir, the information necessary on company profits without going through an appropriate process, and the income tax return form and information exchange with the JFSC are the routes, and they take a small amount of time, obviously, before that can be completed. And my budget proposals, of course, members will be aware, will allow the Taxes Office to collect the profit data from all companies which are taxable in the island as a result of that. Based on that information, I will work with Treasury officials to determine whether it is safe to propose a change to the taxation of larger retail businesses in Budget 2018. It's a point, sir, that the Senator herself makes in her proposition, that to bring forward the proposal, providing it doesn't compromise our corporate tax system. And so we're agreed on that point. So my amendment to Senator Ferguson's amendment gives the Treasury, quite simply, more flexibility to use the data gathered from the company tax returns when we've received it to develop a solution that is evidence-based and is appropriate for Jersey and the makeup of Jersey corporate profits. We are simply saying that by removing the sum taken or applied in Guernsey of £500,000 of profits, we don't know at the moment, because we don't know the profit levels, whether £500,000 is right. It might be higher than that. It might be that we have to reduce it to a figure lower than that. We don't know at this stage because the corporate profit information is not available here in the island. So we want the flexibility when the data is collected to be able to set it at an appropriate level. But what I can say to members is we are committed to looking at ways of expanding the scope of businesses that we can bring within the corporate tax net to address some of the issues that the Senator has rightly raised. Latest data, sir, that we have in Treasury suggests that the tax leakage, if I can put it that way, that's between non-locally owned companies trading in the island where the profits go off island. Those profits, of course, are still going to be taxed in the jurisdiction where the shareholders reside, but it is revenue that is lost to the island. And we think that tax leakage amounts to around about £7.5 to £8 million a year. And the measure of expanding the scope of 010 will help us to close that gap. It's again a matter of fairness as well as a matter of generating some additional revenue and making sure that we don't have leakage in our corporate tax system. So my amendment to the Senator's amendment is simply saying, yes, we agree with the principle, yes, we want to do it, yes, we're actually doing it. We've started the process of collecting the data with the intention of bringing back a firm proposal in Budget 2018. But we do, and I would urge members to support the fact that we want to have the data first, which will come as a result of the new information from the 2015 corporate tax returns, which will be then analysed by the Treasury Department and allow us to bring forward an informed proposal of the exact levels that we need to apply and on the basis that we are able to proceed because we don't damage the 010 corporate tax system. So I would therefore ask members to support my amendment to the Senator's amendment. Thank you, sir.
Is the amendment seconded?
Yes, sir.
Does any member wish to? Deputy Masson.
Thank you, sir. Yes, there's just a couple of points that I would like to make on this. Senator Ferguson, when she opened this, and I appreciate we're talking about the Minister's amendment, did mention kind of the history, of course. What's happened in the time is certainly the cultural change and attitudes towards corporations and companies, and particularly the banking sector, in the past 8 years has vastly changed, even in Jersey, to when it was a sacred cow that you couldn't say anything against, to actually the greater attitude of calling for reform in those sectors. But something I specifically want the, and therefore when we looked at what happened in the past, you had the race to the bottom between, which was led by the Isle of Man, which then had knock-on effect. And of course the corporations were wringing their hands and of course playing the jurisdictions against one another because the threat was always, well, if you don't do it, we're going to move to another jurisdiction. So therefore, the point I want to ask the Treasury Minister, in undertaking this work, what work emphasis is going to be done in working with the other Crown dependencies in order to avoid the jurisdictions being played off against one another yet again, because as we've seen in I know, I don't know if it's one of Deputy Sutton's questions, Deputy Mezek's questions previously, but when we've looked at the shift from corporation tax to personal taxation and the way that the balance has thrown, you know, that hasn't really been, in some ways it hasn't been good for the population because the way that the tax burden has shifted. Of course, the counter argument is, yes, but at least we still have the finance industry. So there is that aspect to it. So I want to know what work is going to be done in order to prevent the jurisdictions being placed off against one another when this work is going to be reviewed. Thank you, sir.
Senator Ferguson.
Thank you, sir. It sounds a bit like the tax review I asked for at the medium-term finance plan. Yes, the tax leakage, well, my figures come from 2008, 2009, so obviously they'll be different. And when the Minister talks about taking evidence, the note on the company tax return applies to Jersey companies, I think you'll find, not companies overseas or branches of other companies. Those will come with the base erosion profit sharing, thank you, regulations which are coming in late in the new year, which will cover this. But the Minister raises a number of points as his amendment. He says he's seeking a way to subject the profits of larger retail businesses without setting the internationally compliant status of the island's 010 tax status at risk. No problem there. I have no argument with that. But maybe I'm being a little slow, sir, because Guernsey and the Isle of Man are both subject to the same regime and risks. And it's 3 years since the Isle of Man changed their system, and over a year since Guernsey changed theirs. Has anybody heard anything about objections? I think not. According to the report, the Minister proposes to postpone any decision until the 2018 budget proposals. What is the point of leaving it until 6 months before the next elections? And that's what his amendment means, to agree in principle that from 2018, and goes on to say, bring forward the legislative changes for debate during 2017. So we agree on the basics, and all we're debating is the rates, 20% and 500,000. There's a fairly supercilious comment, which is not worthy of the Minister, about my lifting the proposal from the Guernsey proposal. And the Guernsey one appears to have been lifted from the Isle of Man proposal, except the Isle of Man's gone for 10%. The Minister has also struck out the word all, preceding retail businesses. But if we are to comply with 010, we must apply these rules to all businesses. Effectively, the Minister's amendment maintains the status quo. I wonder if I dare use that phrase, Sir Rod. Say a lot, make broad general hints, and do nothing. The Minister may not have noticed, but I said in principle, like Deputy Mezek's proposition to amend the budget. I didn't say must, I didn't say shall. I left a degree of flexibility within principle. If the Minister doesn't like 20% or 500,000, it gives him freedom to change these, provided he has the evidence and rationale to support these changes. And what is wrong with not reinventing the wheel? The most effective article in the income tax law has been Article 134A. For the layman, this is the article which allows the comptroller to take a long, hard look at your affairs and decide whether or not he's going to investigate. I'm assured by people who are more expert in tax matters than me, including a previous treasurer, a vintage one I might add, sir, who was incredibly tight-fisted, that this article was effectively purloined from New Zealand legislation. The current philosophy that profits should be taxed in the jurisdiction in which they are earned is equitable. Employee taxes from these companies, excuse me, sir, employee taxes that we get from these companies do not cover the wear and tear on the infrastructure of the island. There will be comments that this will put up costs to islanders, but what about the UK companies trading here who not only leave the UK VAT on the prices they charge, but they charge GST on top of the UK price, which includes VAT? My proposal, I emphasise, in principle, is a very simple one. If the Isle of Man and Guernsey have not had their changes queried, why should we? And why should we not provide a degree of equity for local companies? And why do we need to make my amendment so bland that it will sink without trace and be buried in the long grass? Why can the Minister not be reasonable and say, we accept your proposition, instead of trying to make it meaningless and then bring it back virtually unchanged in a few months' time? I ask the Assembly not to support this amendment, which will emasculate my amendment.
Senator Balash.
So I think that Senator Ferguson is to be commended for bringing this matter before the Assembly, because there is a great deal of misunderstanding abroad about the 0-10 tax system which we have in relation to corporate taxation. And I think it is good that the Assembly has the opportunity to debate amendments to the system. I think it can fairly be said, and I speak as a minister in the government, that the government has been a little overcautious in relation to the edicts of the European Union Code of Conduct Group on Business Taxation. As members will know, I'm sure, this is a political group made up of the finance ministers of the countries of the European Union, on which the island is not represented. We have nonetheless agreed some years ago that we would seek to comply with the precepts laid down by this group because we do not wish to be accused with any justification of having unfair tax practices. It is generally accepted in the international community that it is unfair to discriminate in the tax treatment of companies which are owned by residents and those that are owned by non-residents. And that, in essence, is why we have brought in to our system the 0-10 treatment of corporate taxation. The basic rate of taxation for companies is 0, because if it were not so, a large proportion of the financial services industry would be adversely affected, and the tax revenues of the island would take a considerable dip. No one wants to see that, I'm quite sure. And therefore, one should be careful, I think, about tampering with the 0-10 tax system, because it is the bread and butter of our economy. It enables Jersey to attract financial services companies because there is a 0 rate of taxation. I think Senator Ferguson agrees with much of that. She does not wish to jeopardize the acceptance by the international community of the fairness of our tax system in accordance with international norms. I'm sorry that she won't accept the amendment of the Treasury Minister, because all that the Minister is seeking to do is to achieve a little more wriggle room in the way in which changes are to be brought forward. For my part, I'm very happy to put it on record that I am very sympathetic to the proposals that have been put forward by Senator Ferguson. There will no doubt be discussions both amongst the Council of Ministers and with the Corporate Scrutiny Panel, and perhaps more widely, on what the appropriate way to tax companies carrying out retail business in the island might be. But for my part, I must say I'm very sympathetic to the notions that have been put forward by Senator Ferguson. I shall, however, be supporting the amendment of Senator McLean, not in any sense because it is brought with the intention of kicking this into the long grass. I do not believe that to be the case. I'm sure that the Senator will confirm that when he sums up to the debate. But I hope that members nonetheless will support the giving a little more flexibility to the Treasury Minister in bringing about some appropriate change to the tax system.
Deputy Martin?
Oh yes, sir, and for once it's a real pleasure to follow the last speaker, and I actually agree with everything he has said. And I wasn't going to speak in this debate, but it's really to urge Senator Ferguson, because when I saw this, her amendment, and then I thought, it is, as these comments say, it's very prescriptive. They've only introduced it in 2016. It's sometimes best to wait a little to see what mistakes they have made. And, well, basically, I think it is. It's always a little bit to come a little bit after. And that's all to me. The Senator says that this will basically ruin her amendment. And I didn't see it like that when it was lodged, and I still don't see it after I've heard what both you and the Treasury Minister. I think it is a really sensible amendment, and I just think it is saying it's not being too prescriptive. They've been saying they're going to do something about it. So for once, well, not for once, it seems like for once, but when I have to say, well done to the Treasury Minister in this time, and I will be supporting his amendment. It was so very rare, I had to say it. Thank you, sir.
Sir, can I raise a Defoe on the Constable of Trinity, please? Yes, Defoe's raising the Constable of Trinity. Any other member wish to speak on the proposition? On the amendment, I should say. Senator Rosen.
Thank you, sir. So I rise to support strongly the Treasury Minister's amendment from the financial services industry point of view. So 010 was never an easy issue to deal with. And whilst I accept the remarks made by the External Relations Minister that the island voluntarily complied with the Code of Conduct group, which were the opining body which caused not only Jersey but Guernsey and the Isle of Man to move to the 010 model. And of course it must be said that it was not the zero which caused the main erosion of income. It was the move from 20 to 10% that caused the majority of the erosion of the income, because we had the exempt company status. Now, the unintended consequence, which has vexed and been a difficulty for this Assembly, including previous Treasury Ministers, the last two, has been how to deal with the conundrum of needing to comply voluntarily or otherwise. We had to comply because if we would have been blacklisted by the EU, we would not have a financial services industry. Now, the important difference is, I think it's important to say, that there was always a greater latitude in the Isle of Man who brought in the so-called Tesco tax, because their financial services industry is so much smaller than ours. Ours is much larger, and therefore the effect of that means that the balance of the amount of companies to defend the zero rate is different. And the Minister is being absolutely right in saying that he, as I had done previously, is going to be getting much more information for us to defend. And I also compliment and thank the current Treasury Minister for saying very, very clearly the statement of confidence that the finance industry needs, which is that until the world changes, and we have no idea, as we've seen seismic events in the world on the last year, until the world changes, 010 is the form of tax which is in the island's best interests, even though it has the unintended consequence, which none of us have ever been comfortable with, of having effectively local companies that are trading here, such as retailers, not paying tax. The Deputy of Greville is on duty in Westminster, representing and leading the delegation with Senator Ruccio and Deputy Wickenden, and she is one of those members that has raised these issues many, many times before. And if she would be here, because she has been debating this and put forward amendments, asking previous Treasury Ministers to look at this, she would be also, I think, saying that, that it is good that we are looking at the ability of charging a retailer. The Isle of Man, however, sir, is a different economy. And the Isle of Man Tesco tax is just that. I'm not aware of any other large retailer that is caught by the Tesco tax. And what the Minister is attempting to do is effectively giving himself some wriggle room in order to see just how wide he can cast that net, but without, at the same time, and the words in his amendment are absolutely vital, that it does not propose a risk to the 010 regime, which would be effectively translating to mean an issue to our financial services economy. Now, I just remind members that our financial services economy, despite all of the predictions of some people, is growing, and is growing strongly. And I think it is a matter of pride to, I hope, all members of this Assembly that today we have, as the Treasury Minister said in his speech, a larger number of people employed in financial and business services than we did at the peak of the crisis in 2007. And if Deputy Wickenden was here, he would also say that 30% of jobs in any event because of technology have disappeared. So that means that we are working hard and we are actually being very successful. But to be successful, we have to have, at the moment, and even Deputy Mezek in the recent senatorial by-election accepted the need for the zero. And I certainly appreciated Deputy Mezek saying that on a public platform. They're saying that he understood why, even though there's the unintended consequences of local companies not paying tax, that he understood why the zero was necessary. And I think that was certainly of great comfort to many people in the finance industry. I'm happy to give way if he wishes.
No, I'm putting my light on to speak later.
Fine. But I know that no member of this Assembly would wish to in any way limit what has been a fantastic resurgence in confidence in our financial services sector. Now, I realise members want to raise tax, as I've always wanted to raise tax, from businesses in Jersey that are operating, and the unintended consequence of 010 imposed on us by the EU, but of course made much more difficult by the 10% rate, which was put by the Isle of Man to complete with Ireland at 12.5%. That was the majority of the revenue that we lost. And that's often something that's forgotten. So we need to do two things. We need to send out a very clear message to our growing and resurgent financial services industry that until the world changes, until perhaps the BEPS world, which BEPS, base erosion and profit shifting, actually sets international rules, which means that tax will be paid in the jurisdiction where the profit is actually made. And the profit is not made in Jersey on the capital that is here, which is the thing that gives us the ability to trade as a finance centre. The zero is zero on the capital because we expect people to pay their taxes before they bring their capital here, and we aggregate it. It then gets obviously upstreamed largely to the United Kingdom, as the capital economics reports show, it is obviously the cooperative stance that Jersey has, that where that capital ends up, it gets taxed in the economic value that is added. The economic value that is added here is in the services, and that's at 10%. Now, what the Minister is doing, I know also, is looking, as his predecessor and his predecessor before that, is just how far can we push that 10% band without compromising the arguments of zero. Because the arguments of zero are at the fundamental heart of the heartbeat of the engine of our economy. The engine of the economy of St Helier, the engine of the economy which means that we can have a budget and continue with our low tax and also all of our other good work that we're doing in providing services. So it is absolutely vital that the Treasury Minister's reasonable amendment, which does give him two wriggle rooms, A, first of all, sending the clear message that 010 matters, because it absolutely does, and anybody that sends a message that say it doesn't matter is effectively jeopardizing the future of the financial services industry in the current world we have. Secondly, it gives the Minister the ability to do further than the Isle of Man, which we don't have Tesco here. But what the Minister has said is he's removed effectively the rather sort of, figure plucked out of the air of £500,000 for retail businesses. I think the Minister is right to say, look, I am prepared to look at this. If the evidence that the data gathering exercise on companies can yield a solution which does not compromise the zero, then he will bring forward matters in legislation, which could actually mean that we can bring more revenue than we thought. But it is of fundamental importance that until the world changes, until the world accepts BEPS and those international rules are agreed, there is no alternative, and the island's overall unbalanced best interest is to have 010, even though I, as other ministers and as the Minister of External Relations has said, always have found it very difficult to have to deal with the unintended consequence of local companies not paying tax. But that is massively outweighed, sir, by the benefit of having the finance sector, which is now not in the state that many members might have thought 5 or 6 or 7 years ago was in decline, is actually growing, and it's growing strongly. And this amendment sends out the message that until the world changes, we keep 010 and we will defend it. And so I urge members to support the aspirations of Senator Ferguson, but also the pragmatism and the clear statement and widening the opportunity that the Treasury Minister actually does. In fact, he is helping us in actually giving him slightly more wriggle room when we get the information, which should be helpful to the Assembly rather than not. And I urge Senator Ferguson again, I don't really quite understand why she has not accepted this, because it seems to me to be an extremely reasonable amendment, carefully thought through by experts, which is worthy of this Assembly's approval. Thank you, sir.
Senator Farnham.
Thank you, sir. A few brief words as Minister responsible for business. I think it's important that I just remind members that whilst I'm supporting this, I just think that we need to plan carefully, because many retail businesses have and are investing significantly in their businesses, investing large amounts of money, growing the employment numbers in the sector. And so we need to be mindful of that. And also, so I would say that remind members that retail is struggling. We are in a different world at the moment with the growth of the internet. And so that's even more reason, I think, not to make what we decide now too prescriptive, because we do need plenty of space to debate this in 2017. And if we make it too prescriptive now, we're going to limit that debate, and we could end up actually not getting anywhere. So I too just want to join the previous speakers in asking Senator Ferguson. I think it will make this debate quicker and easier if she would consider accepting the amendment to her amendment, because I think otherwise we stand the chance of not reaching this debate next year, we'll end up throwing, sir, the baby out with the bathwater, as it were. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, sir. I put my light on to speak when Senator Joseph referenced the position that I'd made clear during the hustings in the senatorial by-election campaign earlier this year, and his recollection, of course, was accurate. I did stand up in that public platform and say what I believe to be true, which is that the zero rate itself is incredibly important and that it should not simply be thrown away without serious consideration about the impact it would have on our economy. And Senator Joseph described why that was the case and why that a zero rate makes particular transactions viable where otherwise they simply wouldn't be, and the effects that it would have on things like double taxation. And I, of course, agreed wholeheartedly with that. And I have to say, from when I've heard other commentators stand up and speak about 010, often people who philosophically I've got much in common with, they often speak in a way that to me suggests that they don't quite understand why the zero rate exists. And I find that worrying. And from the proposer of this original amendment, sometimes I do have to say I think she sometimes uses languages that makes me worry that that particular point hasn't been considered properly, even though I do share her aspiration that we need to get more businesses paying tax where it is reasonable and proper that they should be doing so. And Senator Joseph and Senator McLean both stood up in their speeches on this amendment to say that they support more businesses paying tax. And I couldn't help but feel a bit of sense of déjà vu here, because I remember the first time I saw both Senator Joseph and Senator McLean was in 2008 during the senatorial election campaign. It was actually the first time that I met several other members of this assembly, like Deputy Masson, like Deputy Southern, and Deputy Taddier, actually, for that matter too, where they stood up in the hall in Holier School, where I was a student at the time. I was 17 years old. I was young, aspirational, starry-eyed and idealistic, obviously nothing like what I am today. Yeah, you do get cynical once you've been here a few years, obviously. And I remember hearing what they all had to say about many topics, and 010 was one of them. And I remember the then Deputy McLean, as he was, standing to be senator, where he would eventually be successful, of course. He stood and said virtually the same things that they've said here today. Senator Joseph stood and said virtually the same things they've said today. And we're 8 years forward in time and not any progress has been made at all trying to address the problems that were caused when 010 was introduced. And I have to say that I think that is a sign of a political system which frankly isn't working, and that means that I don't have the confidence of those ministers when they stand up and say that they genuinely want to make progress in the area, that we're going to see any tangible improvements anytime soon. And it's that position that makes me incredibly sympathetic to what Senator Ferguson is trying to do, and that means that I am almost certainly inclined to vote to support her amendment, and will do so wholeheartedly and as a demonstration of my philosophical view and the policy that I've put forward at election time, that I do want to see progress made here to get more businesses paying tax where they should be and where it's proper, without doing anything that damages the viability of a particular part of our economy, which depends on that zero rate for its viability. I think that that's a very moderate and sensible position. It is also a position that it does have to be said that some members of this assembly had 10 years ago when the whole debate on 010 was going on in the first place. And those members, and Deputy Southern was the one who I remember very clearly, who made many comments about 010 when it was going to be introduced, about the problems it would cause, and members derided those members who made those comments, said that the language was a bit different then. They used to say that not only were you anti-finance if you had that point of view, but you were anti-Jersey. And I'm glad to see that we've moved on from that, because that is a divisive and unnecessary way of speaking about people who have simply a different opinion, especially when, now we know, they have been vindicated because what they said actually turned out to be right. Anybody remember Deems distribution? Yeah.
Well, I remember there were a small number of States members. Deputy Higgins, I remember, was one. Deputy Masson, Deputy Southern in particular, was also one who made the points there where the government simply had their fingers in their ears and could only take action eventually when they were forced to. And so I think the attitude of the Council of Ministers towards 010 has been to blame, I think, for why we are largely in the mess we are in terms of our public finances. And what Senator Ferguson, I should say to use the title, is trying to do with this amendment is something philosophically I am on board with. I support that. I want to see real progress made, but I will make the point that with the current leadership of the government in Jersey, I have no faith on them to make any real progress, especially when they are putting an amendment which, as Senator Ferguson says, really does take the bites out of the original proposition, I think. And some members shake their heads, but we see this often where backbenchers attempt to bring forward amendments to provide constructive alternatives to what the Council of Ministers wants, where the Council of Ministers either amend it to take away any obligation for them to actually do anything, or they say, no, we're rejecting this, but we promise we'll have a review. We have lots of reviews, don't we? That's really nice, and that obviously means we make progress, although sometimes that progress takes 10 years rather than what would happen in a proper democracy where things would happen much quicker because we wouldn't accept delaying tactics like this, and not just the politicians, but the members of the public would be demanding much better from their government, much higher standards, which is not the case. And so, as my little way of trying to do something positive on this subject, which has plagued our island for so long, I will be supporting the amendment of Senator Ferguson and commend her for making it, not just because it's a good idea, but it is actually what she said she would endeavour to do if she was re-elected as senator. And I think it's a very nice old-fashioned tradition when politicians actually go ahead to do what it was they said they would do when people voted for them. And so I will be supporting it, sir.
So could I just remind members that this is obviously a debate on the Minister's amendment to the amendment. Deputy Southern.
And thank you, sir. And thank you for that reminder. And I will strictly confine my comments to this amendment. The Assistant Minister for Treasury and Resources points out and can't understand why the Senator Ferguson does not want to accept this, what does he say, carefully thought out amendment, no, carefully thought through by experts. Carefully thought through by experts amendment.
Excuse me, sir. I wonder if Deputy Southern would mind just, it's not the Assistant Minister of Treasury Resources, it's the Assistant Chief Minister that made those comments, sir.
I do apologise wholeheartedly for misunderstanding exactly what role the Assistant Minister does have. He seems to have so many hats on. The Assistant Minister to the Chief Minister, then, who suggested that rejecting this carefully thought through by experts amendment, you can understand why she would. Well, let me perhaps explain why the Senator Ferguson would not accept this amendment, and in particular, why it reminds me of a previous incident when the Deputy of Grouville brought a very firm, very clear amendment or proposition to a budget measure before, suggesting that we had to find a way of making sure that foreign-owned companies paid some tax in Jersey and did not come here to trade for free. And what happened when she brought that was that, lo and behold, it was amended. It was very finely amended with an amendment that was carefully thought through by experts. And what was the phrase that was used which scuppered of that proposition and meant that no progress was made, and meant that the Treasury Minister then could come back to this House and said, we've looked at it, we can't do anything about it. And why they've done that repeatedly since, over the years. Why we make no progress is exactly because of this carefully thought through by experts amendment, which says, providing this does not pose a risk to the 010 regime. Now, Senator Ferguson seems to think that this particular measure will not cause any problems with the 0-10 regime. I'm more suspicious than that. I think this reminds me almost of the Gibraltar solution, which was office space tax, which was immediately spotted by the officials and saying, oh, come on, you can't get away with that. You're just trying to get round your 0-10 rules, your zero in particular. It's not obvious that this will be acceptable. What is obvious is that the move to sabotage any move in that direction, no matter how well thought out or thought through, is time and time again capable of being sabotaged by that simple phrase, providing this does not pose a risk to the 0-10 regime. And I believe that that will be triggered, and that will give this Treasury Minister, yet again, like his predecessor, the opportunity to say, hands in the air, nothing we can do. So we'll get no progress on it if we accept this amendment. So I'm fully supportive of Senator Ferguson saying no to the amendment. Let's get on with the measures I've proposed, and that way perhaps we can get some progress. This sabotages the proposition altogether.
Does any other member wish to speak on the Minister's proposed amendment? Deputy Higgins.
Thank you, sir. I may actually just tread into some of the areas you say we shouldn't do, but it's in response to what actually ministers have actually said in the debate, which needs to be corrected.
It's not a question of shouldn't. I mean, members will have the opportunity when this amendment is voted on to make whatever points they want in connection with the Senator's original proposition. So it's not that you're going to not have the opportunity, it's just that this is a different debate, that's all.
Very well, sir. What I would like to come back to is that since 0-10 came in, we've had a situation where over 85% of all taxes are coming from individuals, ordinary people. We have no taxes coming from companies other than the 10% coming from the finance industry and the 20% from utilities. And what we've actually seen over the time that I've been in this assembly is an unbelievable switch from corporate taxation to personal taxation. And this is what's causing the problems we have in our society. Many people are struggling, not just the very poor. We keep on talking about Middle Jersey. They are definitely struggling. We're all struggling because of the 0-10 tax regime which came in and the switch to personal taxation. And to be honest, there are many companies who would say, well, you should be happy that we're actually here and we're providing employment. You're getting your taxes from our employees. And therefore, they're quite happy to see this switch away from them to the individual. I'm not. And I've always been against the system that has, one, concentrated our economy in one area. Now, for example, we're always talked about being anti-finance. This is the thing. In fact, I'll go back to what Deputy Southern was saying. Good old days. Yeah, the good old days. When we started drawing attention to some of the problems of the policies that were being pursued by the Council of Ministers, we were wreckers. We were anti-finance, we were anti-everything. Well, let's just look at another way. Senator Balash mentioned how he said, where are we? We attracting more financial service companies. Senator Ossoff was talking about, yes, we're seeing the revival of the industry and so on. What we're actually seeing is greater concentration into the financial services industry, which we will never escape from. Now, can I just say, I'm not anti-finance, make that very clear. We have an industry that is providing employment for an awful lot of people in this island, and we've got to sort of value the industry for that. But at the same time, we have been vulnerable as an island because we've concentrated all our eggs in the one basket. I remember thinking of the 2008 election, I said exactly the same thing. What we're doing is we're just increasing our reliance on that one industry. And if you think back to the 2008 recession, which we've only just come out of, it was made worse because it was a financial services-induced recession. And they are the worst that you can get. And the more reliant you are on finance industry activities, the longer the recession will last and the deeper that it will be. So we're paying the consequences of that. Now, we need to rebalance our economy. You know, I've said it before, we keep on hearing about economic growth, we're going to diversify the economy. We don't. Because the ministers are piling more and more into the financial services industry. Okay, let's go back to this then. So what we've got then is the minister is trying to protect the 30,000 companies that are registered in Jersey that pay no tax. Right, this is where the capital was coming in that the minister was talking about. And so they're trying to tread a sort of a tightrope in one sense. But we have to deal with the ordinary person in this island. And we need to rebalance the tax take so it comes to alleviate it from the personal and put it back to the companies. What Senator Ferguson is putting forward, I will support. We need to find other ways of trying to sort of reduce the burden on the ordinary citizen. If we go along with the minister, it'll be put off for another year, another 2 years, another 3 years. It'll never happen. And so I would argue that we should support the minister and, again, do it to help the ordinary person in this island who's suffering under the current tax burden. Thank you, sir.
Does any other member wish to speak on the minister's amendment? Deputy St Mary.
Thank you, sir. Very briefly, sir, I have difficulty in understanding why this debate is continuing. I appreciate why backbenchers are suspicious, if that's the right word, of ministers bringing in amendments which may thereafter cause delay, but this amendment does not do that. It follows closely the original proposition and finishes up by saying to bring forward the necessary legislative changes for debate by the Assembly during 2017. Surely, if we approve that proposition as amended, they are committed to that. I therefore see no reason not to adopt the amendment. And I shall be supporting it. Thanks.
Deputy St Warren.
Thank you, sir. I was listening to Deputy Mezek's speech, and it was that caused me really to rise to my feet, because it seemed to me he gave a very cogent speech until the point really where he came to reject the very reasonable amendment to the amendment, it seems to me. He wants to reject that amendment because he wants to castigate the Council of Ministers for past inaction rather than anything that is put before us today. It seems to me that he's taking an oppositional stance for political reasons. I think all of that is unnecessary because we are all agreed, it would seem, on the outcome we would like to achieve here. Both the amendment and the amendment to the amendment seek an agreement in principle, and both have the proviso that nothing should create a risk to the 0-10 regime. To Deputy Southern, I would say that if he believes the Council of Ministers intend to be obstructive, then they could be obstructive to Senator Ferguson's amendment, because that equally is an in-principle decision and contains the proviso. So if that intention is there, then why are we having this debate? But we're having this debate because it seems to me the Treasury Minister has brought forward an amendment to Senator Ferguson's amendment, which works and is very helpful and flexible. It seeks an agreement in principle also, but it seems to me that Senator Ferguson's proposal asks for that in principle agreement, but is nonetheless restrictive. It limits us to considering the 20% tax rate and limits us to considering a threshold of £500,000 per annum. However, the amendment proposed by the Treasury Minister does give us that flexibility to allow us to further consider that detail when the evidence becomes available. So, really, as I felt just the same as Deputy Martin, this is very reasonable, and I would have hoped that the Senator Ferguson would have been able to accept it, allowing us to consider far more detail when the research and evidence is available to us. Thank you, sir.
Well, Senator, you've already spoken.
I was
going to say, sir, that sorry, if the Minister can assure me that this will come back to the Assembly before the summer recess, then I will accept his amendment. And provided he will accept the amendment in total as amended. If he can give those assurances.
Well, that's a helpful intervention, Senator. It obviously doesn't amount to a second speech. It amounts to a confirmation of your position, and the Minister will respond at the end of this, and you will hear what to say there. Does any other member wish to speak on the Minister's amendment? Call upon the Minister to respond.
Thank you, sir, and thank you to members for their comments. I'll try and deal with some of the points that have been raised just before I deal with Senator Ferguson and the point that she just asked about. So there were some questions raised, and I do think I do need to address these first and foremost. And we start in order with Deputy Masson, who was concerned about what I think he described as a race to the bottom by this being a change to the corporate tax system. I did, in fact, make it clear, I hope, in the budget speech yesterday, that I am absolutely committed to 0.10 and the zero rate specifically, which is central and key to our economy and is central to tax neutrality and all the points made previously by Senator Ozov. And in fact, the proposals that we have here are in relation to adjustments to the broadening of the scope of the corporate tax system to bring some additional businesses within scope. There's no question of racing to the bottom because, of course, what we're proposing here, sir, is that we follow the moves already made by the Isle of Man and Guernsey broadly. It's just a question as to what the profit thresholds might be and what the exact rate might be, upwards, not downwards. You can't go clearly below zero, but we're talking about an adjustment to the 10 or 20% rates as to whether the businesses would come into those areas. So it's nothing to do, sir, I'm afraid, with a race to the bottom, or I'm delighted to say it's nothing to do with the race to the bottom. This is about potentially bringing large retailers who have a physical presence in the island within the corporate tax net based on data that we're collecting at the moment, but the work is yet to be finished. Sir, I would thank the interventions of clearly Senator Balash and Ozov were helpful. I would make one comment about my other ministerial colleague, Senator Farnham, who, representing the business community, raises understandable concerns. But of course, the proposals are based on taxing substantial profits. So I don't think there's any concern, but I'm sure over the passage of time we will deal with any further concerns that he may have. Sir, I was delighted. I was puffed out with pride almost at Deputy Martin extolling such praise in my direction. As she said, she almost ruined it by saying it doesn't happen very often or it doesn't happen at all. But I very much hope that this welcome change will become a habit and we can continue. And I would just add, Happy Christmas, Deputy. So some other points I would just pick up on. Deputy Mezak, we also had been getting on rather well today, and then suddenly we had this, and it was a point raised by Deputy Southern and I think Higgins, about this distrust for ministers, this feeling of conspiracy, and that we're trying to derail backbenchers' propositions all the time. That is not the case, and it's certainly not the case here. What we're proposing, I believe, is very reasonable indeed in terms of this amendment to the amendment. I would also like to just say to Deputy Mezak, I really wish he wouldn't, he makes a lot of interventions and makes some very positive statements which are very good and some very incisive statements at times, but he also tends to come out with comments like, which other of his colleagues do, that the public finances are in a mess. Our public finances, sir, are not in a mess. They are the envy of most places around the world. We have significant assets. And the economy in this island is performing very strongly. And I think we just need to put that into clear context. It's not all doom and gloom. And I really wish that the Deputy and his colleagues would be a little bit more positive or less negative even, if they can manage that in those areas. So the Deputy also made the point about how long it's taken to bring this forward, or any form of measure to bring more companies within the net. I made it clear in the budget statement yesterday that it's a stated aim. We are actively working on it. We've made changes to the income tax return forms to collect the data, as I've said. The fact is, this is complex. We cannot afford to be in a position where we have our corporate tax rate scrutinised by the EU Code Group or run the risk of going on blacklists and so on and so forth. That's why we have to tread carefully with this. It was exactly the position we got by the deemed distribution system, which was, of course, picked up by the Code Group, and that's why that came to the end of its short tenure. Sir, this amendment to Senator Ferguson, I think, is very reasonable. And I have to say that Deputy Southern surprised me with the comments that he made, for the simple reason that I'm not certain that he'd read the amendment, the underlying amendment from Senator Ferguson terribly clearly. She is bringing forward, and it says in the opening lines, it's to agree, first of all, in principle. He's suggesting that as soon as the amendment was agreed, that we would find ways not to do it. That's not the intention. We're trying to find ways to do it based on the data that we're collecting. Secondly, within the Senator's own amendment, it says, provided, that's the data that's collected, provided what we discover does not pose a risk to 010. And I think all members in this Assembly, the vast majority, sir, agree with that. It's a sensible and pragmatic approach to take. And so to suggest that it's sabotage and conspiracy is completely inaccurate. Moving, sir, on to Senator Ferguson and the position in particular around Guernsey and the Isle of Man. She makes the point that they, sir, have moved ahead and done that, and yet we're taking time to get on with this. We need the data, as I've already pointed out. And I should just say to members that the Isle of Man were able to progress and be the first Crown dependency to broaden the tax base into this area, and I emphasise into this area, because they went along to the Code Group and they had the data and the evidence to be able to present the case. We do not have the data, and that's why we're not in the same position that they found themselves in. We have to collect it first to be able to prove the case and to make certain that we maintain the principles of the majority of companies and the majority of tax fall into that area, and that's the work that we're seeking to do. All the amendment is asking for is that we have the additional flexibility when we have the data, the £500,000 that the Senator would like to, which is broadly picked from Guernsey and the Isle of Man. We don't know that's applicable to this economy. It may be less. We may reduce it below £500,000. We may go lower. We just don't know. And the 20% rate, we may find we can't do 20%. We may do 10%. I just don't know. It will depend. We need to get the balance entirely right. Now, the Senator, sir, stood a moment ago and said that in principle she would accept the amendment if I can give an undertaking to come back by the summer. I think what the amendment says is that we need to bring this back for budget 18. I don't know, sir, the exact timings for collecting the data and being able to analyse the data. I can't stand here, sir, and give her that undertaking, but her proposition makes it very clear. All we're changing is the amounts, the £500,000. We're taking that out to give us flexibility, and we're taking out the 20% rate to give us flexibility. Otherwise, it's exactly as per her amendment, sir. I'm prepared to give way if she'd like to.
No, sir. It also takes out the word all. tucked away all retail businesses has been deleted and it's just retail businesses.
Well, applied to retail businesses, it takes out all large retail businesses, so that would simply, applied to retail businesses would be the general statement of retail businesses.
It simply broadens it. Again, we want to leave all the options open because we don't know what the data is going to show us, sir. Again, I don't feel that's constraining. In fact, it's broadening. I think it's, of course, I would stand here and say that, but I do, sir, feel that this is very, very reasonable. And I really would just urge members, I think, sir, perhaps we should have a vote on it, unless the Senator will accept what I'm seeking to do. I'm very happy if she would. But if not, I suggest we go to the vote because I think it improves her amendment, sir.
Well, I think we have to go to a vote in any event, Minister, whether the Senator accepts it or not, because it's now open, the debate is now open. Very well.
Please, sir.
The appel is called for. I invite members to return to their seats. The vote is on whether to accept the amendment of the Treasury Minister to Senator Fergus's amendment. I'll ask the greffier to open the voting. Members have had the opportunity of casting votes. I'll ask the greffier to close the voting. The amendment has been adopted. 35 votes pour, 2 votes contre, no abstentions.
2, please.
Senator Ferguson and Deputy Southern voted contra.
Very well. We now return to the debate on Senator Ferguson's amendment as amended. Does any other member wish to speak on that proposition? Very well. All those in favour of adopting the appel is called for. Ask the greffier to open the voting. No,
Sorry, didn't I have to close it, sir?
You proposed, it was seconded, but as no one has spoken on it, there's no reply to anything.
Oh, that's frustrating.
Not for us, it isn't, sir.
So I invite members to return to their seats, and ask the greffier to open the voting. If members have had the opportunity of casting their votes, ask the greffier to close the voting. The amendment has been adopted. 35 votes pour, 3 votes contre, no abstentions.
Those voting contra, the Conotable of St John, Deputy of St Martin and Deputy Truscott.
Very well, that concludes all of the amendments. So we now return to debate on the main budget proposition. Does any member wish to speak? Very well, if no member wishes to speak, then all members in favour of adopting the budget kindly show.
The appel, please.
The appel is called for. So, Minister, I assume you're taking this en bloc and not on a paragraph by paragraph basis? Well, yes, indeed. Very well, the appel is called for. I invite members to return to their seats. And I ask the greffier to open the voting. All members have had the opportunity of casting their vote. I ask the greffier to close the voting. The proposition and therefore the budget as amended has been adopted. 35 votes pour, 2 votes contre, no abstentions.
Those voting contra, Deputy Southern and Deputy Mezek.
The next item is the draft Finance 2017 Budget Jersey Law, lodged by the Minister for Treasury and Resources, and I ask the greffier to read the citation.
Draft Finance 2017 Budget Jersey Law 2000, a law to set the standard rate of income tax for 2017 and to amend further the Income Tax Jersey Law 1961, the Rates Jersey Law 2005, the Stamp Duties and Fees Jersey Law 1998, the Taxation Land Transactions Jersey Law 2009, and the Customs and Excise Jersey Law 1999, the states, subject to the sanction of Her Most Excellent Majesty and Council, have adopted the following law.
Minister.
So, following the decisions reached in the budget debate, the draft Finance 2017 Budget Jersey Law proposes the standard rate of income tax and the income tax exemption thresholds for 2017. It also makes a number of amendments to the income tax law, in particular changing the allowances, deductions and reliefs available to personal income tax payers. It also makes a small number of administrative changes for income tax purposes, which include reporting of 0% company profits. It amends the rates law, stamp duty law and land transaction tax law. It also sets the level of AMPO duties for 2017. So I move the principles.
Are the principles seconded? Does any member wish to speak on the principles of the draft finance law?
So I don't wish to speak on the principles. I think the principles are right, but I do think it is a great pity that this law has been used to try and amend the rates law, which I think, quite honestly, needs a lot more consultation, a lot more thinking, because there is so many problems. It needs more in-depth consultation, in-depth thinking about it, more consultation certainly with the constables and with the people it's going to affect. So when we come to part 2 of this law, sir, I would ask that the articles be taken separately so that we who wish to oppose them can do so, sir.
Well, of course, we will come on to a debate upon the various articles in second reading in due course, Gonitar. Does any other member wish to speak on the principles of the law? Call on the Minister to respond.
Thank you, sir. I maintain the proposition.
Very well. Those members in favour of adopting the principles kindly show. Those against? Sorry. Could those members in favour of adopting kindly show clearly? If we're going
We have the appel, please.
The appel is called for. I invite members to return to their seats. And I ask the greffier to open the voting. Members have had the opportunity of casting their votes. I ask the greffier to close the voting. The principles have been adopted. 36 votes for, 1 vote contre, no abstentions.
Deputy Mezek voted contre.
Well, Minister, how do you wish to take the articles in second reading?
So the way I would propose to take the articles would be Articles 1 to 14 en bloc. I would then, taking into consideration the Constable's request, it is effectively Articles 16 and 17. So I'll take Articles 15, 16 and 17 individually. And I will then propose Articles 18 to 20 en bloc due to the amendment relating to the alcohol AMPOs. And I will propose Articles 21 and 22 individually. I will then finally propose Articles 23 to 27 en bloc. So if I could summarise, so 1 to 14, then 15, 16, 17, 18 to 20 en bloc, 21 and 22 individually, because they relate to the AMPOs, and then finally Articles 23 to 27 en bloc.
Do you wish to speak to the articles?
Yes, sir. I will just give a brief summary, if I may, so members are clear on the key ones. Article 2, as members were no doubt aware, are the annually set the standard rate of income tax. Therefore, Article 2 sets the standard rate at 20% for 2017. Article 3, the increase in exemption thresholds and maximum deduction for childcare costs for 2017. reducing the differential between married and cohabiting couples by increasing the second earner's allowance. Article 7 gives the controller of taxes the power to obtain details of the profits reported by all companies resident in Jersey. Article 8 enabling regulations to be created that will require local banks to report certain information relating to Jersey residents to the Taxes Office. Articles of other relevant. Thank you very much. Article 8 enables the states the powers to make regulations that will require local banks to report information, as I've pointed out. Article 9 enables the Tax Office to move a cohort of exempt individuals from previous year tax payments basis to a current year on the event they would become liable to pay tax. Article 10 introduces new unilateral relief provisions under which certain qualifying companies may claim relief from the effect of international double taxation. Articles 11 and 12 introduce minimum retirement capital tests. 13 introduces new provisions to allow an individual whole or partial exemption to tax or lump sum payments from overseas pension schemes. And 14 allows the Taxes Office to share information for the purposes of administering the high-value residency regime. So I propose Articles 1 to 14.
Are Articles 1 to 14 seconded? Yes, sir. Does any member wish to speak on Articles 1 to 14? Very well. Those members in favour of adopting Articles 1 to 14 in second reading kindly show. Those against? Articles 1 to 14 are adopted. Yes, Minister.
Thank you, sir. Article 15 simply provides the interpretation for Part 2 of the Finance Law. So I propose Article 15.
Is Article 15 seconded? Does any member wish to speak on Article 15? Those members in favour, I beg your pardon, can I tell no. Those members in favour of adopting Article 15 kindly show. Those against? Article 15 is adopted.
Sir, Article 16, which we will take separately, gives the states the power by regulations to revalue the rateable values of properties. So I propose Article 16.
Article 16 seconded. Does any member wish to speak? Connitab of St Clement.
Sir, I really believe that it's a shame that the Minister is using this debate, this budget debate, to attempt to introduce two major changes to the rates law, which should, I suggest, be part of a standalone proposition, and as I said before, subject to wide consultation. So the first part is talking about a revaluation. Now, the so-called revaluation of rateable values is totally unnecessary, totally inappropriate, and indicates to me, sir, that perhaps the Minister has not quite understood the current rates law and operation. Because not for some 11 years now has the rateable value been based on rental values, but rather on attributes, which means the facilities of the land. For example, size, rooms, double glazing, central heating, parking, location, and other things, but certainly not the rental value. One of the reasons the states changed the system, which the Minister wants us to return to, is that rental values in sectors can move both up and down over time. Following the freezing of rateable values some 11 years ago or so, the rental values of good agricultural land, for example, fell from £120 a verge to something like £70 a verge. But this has since reversed, with rental values increasing again. That is the simplest of examples, but raises a question is whether rateable values should be recalculated because the relativity of rental values in different sectors has changed. But even this, sir, overlooks the fact that rental values are no longer relevant to the rateable value. The states took the decision to move away from rental values and instead use the concept of attributes which I just described. And it has not been explained by the Minister why rental values should be the basis of assessment instead of attributes. He hasn't told us in his comments why he would want to make this change. So the important thing to remember, or an important thing to remember, is that the payment of rates is not directly linked to the provision of services to a ratepayer, but it's a local tax to meet the running costs of the parish or to fund the island-wide rate. As the ratepayers share directly in funding those costs, any decrease for one sector will result in an increase for other ratepayers. There will be no change in the amount raised in rates, only in the distribution between ratepayers of different sectors. And I've got to be honest here, I'm not aware of any sector complaining they are being treated unfairly. In any event, it must be remembered that the rates law already provides a mechanism to adjust the rateable value of land or property if someone feels they have been assessed unreasonably. The law requires that rateable values shall be proportionate to the attributes. That means the land with the best attributes shall have the highest rateable value, and the land with the poorest attributes shall have the lowest rateable value, and so in proportion for land with attributes between those extremes. So if a new office is built with better facilities of a higher quality than those of other offices, this should be reflected in the rateable value. The rateable value should be proportionately higher. Rateable values can be reviewed at the request not only of the owner or occupier, but also of the Canotab, the Supervisory Committee, or member of the Assessment Committee. So no case has been made for this massive piece of work, which will bring no benefit to the parishes or the states, but will bring significant work and costs without one penny of recompense coming from the ratepayers. The committee is of the view that a revaluation should only be considered if it can be demonstrated that it will be beneficial. This benefit has not been quantified for any particular sector, and nor has the impact on other sectors been calculated. Further, if land is to be revalued, then all land should be revalued at the same date, a massive piece of unnecessary work. So I hope the states will reject this part of the proposition. So it's worth noting, I think, sir, that 3 or 4 years ago, the then Minister for Treasury and Resources produced a green paper, a property tax review consultation. And the summary of responses, one of them, sir, which was published by the current minister, says, sir, stability. It was suggested that the current rate system has been in place since 2005, and although rateable value has not changed since then, this was seen as a positive, as it gave stability and certainty to the ratepayer. It was further suggested that the current system was introduced as a result of the compounded problems, I repeat, sir, the compounded problems of assessing properties on rental value. So I will oppose this particular article, sir.
Does any other member wish to speak on Article 16 in second reading? Conrad St John.
Thank you, sir. One of the arguments I have heard, and it's probably rumour, I don't know, that rental values have changed. But rental values is not an attribute towards the rateable values put on a property. And I'll give you an example. Within the agricultural industry, land is rated according to its attributes, either 0 rates, 70 quarters per verge, or 120 quarters of verge, depending on whether it's scrub land, 0 rate, poor agricultural land, which is 70 quarters of verge, and 120 quarters of verge for prime land. However, on the island, we have different sectors. We have the potato growing sector and we have the dairy sector. 2 totally different industries, but all within the umbrella of agriculture. The rents paid by dairy farmers, as an average, are usually significantly lower than those paid by the potato industry, because the potato has a higher value cash crop. Yet, the rateable value of the land remains the same. So the rates don't change as to whether it's occupied by a dairy farmer or occupied by a potato grower or any other agricultural user. It could be grazing, it could be intensive cropping. It's the same rateable value. And the same applies for properties. And the idea is that two identical houses should pay the same rates, although they may be paying different rents if they are indeed rented from different landlords. And this is the idea of the rate system, is to provide stability, equality, and ease of management. And I urge members to reject this article. Thank you, sir.
Senator Ferguson.
Thank you, sir. I hope the Minister will explain exactly why the Treasury feels this is necessary. I would have thought that in line with the Connétable of St Clement, then it would have been a much better proposition to bring an amendment to the rates law, and instead of kind of stuffing it in, I'm sorry, sir, not parliamentary, is it? Appending it to the finance law and hoping that nobody will notice it. You know, is this another part of a plan to centralise control of the rates and take it out of the hands of the parishes? I don't know. Would the Minister please explain?
Does any other member wish to speak on Article 16 in second reading? Senator Moses.
Thank you, sir. Sir, let us be very clear in that this amendment by the, or this article proposed by the Treasury Minister is inextricably linked with the next article, which is the issue of the liability of the states paying rates on property, and effectively those members who are considering their votes about whether or not the state's paying rates need to at least take account of the arguments that are being addressed in relation to that. Because I think it's fair to say, and I think I'm not going to disagree with the Connétable of St Clement, and as I look and look at many of the constables, and as a defender, as a son of a former constable and as a defender of the parochial system, it gives me no pleasure to be speaking in a way that is Connétables are finding difficulty, and that is going back to being a Connétable son and a supporter of P and a firm voter of the constable staying in this assembly. And it is linked with what I think is a dual opposition to both this article and the article which makes the parish of the parishes liable for state's property, because one simply hangs together. And indeed, the reason why it's perfectly appropriate and why Senator Ferguson, if I may respectfully say, is incorrect, is that because I think the constables are opposing both the concept of the states paying rates. And so the two things are linked, and I want members to be under no illusion that the two things are linked. Now, why is this being proposed? Well, I will declare, sir, that I was a young deputy, I think sitting next to my good friend Deputy Martin at the time, when the original rates law was brought to this assembly. And I warned of the potential long-term consequences of not effectively using a revaluation or, and I can't use the word re-attribution because simply the concept doesn't exist. And the Connétable of St John has articulated exactly the reasons why that we need to do this, but for different reasons. And I think that I speak with some knowledge about rates, and I think also one has to be knowledgeable that the chairman of the Rates Assessment Committee, who is the individual that is the overseer of rates assessments and coordinates rates assessments. And indeed, the St Helier rates assessment chairman is an individual who perhaps is not liked by some other rates assessors, but nevertheless is absolutely behind and fully supportive. I can hear the constables looking aghast, but it is the rates assessor of St Helier who assesses more commercial property, which we are dealing with, that is fully behind this proposal. And I think that it is important for members to be absolutely understanding as to why he and I and other members are so strongly supportive of this, and to understand the unintended consequences of what the Constable of St John says is a simple system is effectively absolutely unfair with the effluxion of time. So you may have noticed that I popped over to seek advice from the Solicitor General, and I wish not to surprise the Solicitor General in surprising him with a question, because I think I can answer it from a political point of view, but if there is a legal point that he wishes to make, then and if I've erred on the legal side, then I stand to be corrected. But attributes for houses, there is no problem. I have no problem at all with the issue of attributes for houses, because an attribute is an attribute for a single, and it's like the debate we had yesterday. Our commercial properties are used for all sorts of different things, but residential properties are used for living in. Now, they're either bigger or smaller, and they've either got nice attributes or otherwise, but they are effectively a domestic residential unit. Now, the difficulty is, and this was actually explained by the Constable of St John in opposing this, is that effectively, irrespective of economic use, I'll repeat, irrespective of economic use, and he used the existence of agricultural land, whether or not it be dairy or potato, it's the same rates. Well, that's crazy. When you're dealing with something commercial, commercial means business, business means economics, economics means value. You have to look at value. You can't just look at something which is in a box, which is attributes of residential property. I can get my head around assessing a house of different proportions on attributes because it's all about living. What I can't get my head around, and by action of rates assessors over a number of years has proven the case, and the Constable of St John is explaining exactly the problem, is that rating non-commercial property is blind to economics and to value. And that is absolutely crazy. And it is crazy, and it is unfair. And it has an unintended consequences of not updating the economic circumstances of businesses paying rates. Now, what I find an extraordinary position to be in is to be here arguing for what the end result is going to be, which is going to be higher economic value premises paying higher rates by having a higher number of quarters. I'll repeat that because I think it's really important, and it really is about the finance industry. The finance industry is doing well. Office rents have gone up. They have gone up a lot, and that's good. Other business sectors, like retailing, which the Minister for Economic Development referred to earlier, have not been in such a good position. And so by casting attributes as the basis on which you pay business rates, you are effectively blind to the economic circumstances of that activity, which is a commercial activity in a commercial place. And so we have to look again, and we have to look and put the economics back into rateable assessed values. It is absolutely essential, because what has happened since the freezing of the so-called attributes is that all premises are treated effectively on their use, but blind to economics. So what is happening, for example, is where rents with retail, and I know that I'm going to hear next that the fixing of rents was when attributes came in, rents had nothing to do with it. But I've looked at very many of the rates books of the island, and I can pretty well work out if you've got a single landlord with a single property and a commercial property, you can actually look at the amount of quarters. And I know what's happened because I declare an interest, I own one. And I know that the similar property, which was converted to attributes, has not had its quarters changed since it was brought in. And that has had the perverse action of meaning that those sectors whose economic value of premises has fallen has remained the same. That means that those sectors of our economy that the Minister for Economic Development was asking and raising questions about previously was concerning, such as hotels and retail. And as the Minister for Digital, sir, I can say that there has been a move from bricks to clicks, and retail is absolutely one of them. Whereas rents on the high street of St Helier were at that level, today they are at that level because of the reality of the commercial activities and the economics of retailing. Similarly, hotels have seen difficult times, and you have seen rent reviews on hotels fall, or at least if they're on a 9-year lease, actually stay stagnant and not increase. It is a crazy world, sir, when we are seeing a changing economic landscape with different rents being ascribed to different types of property, that assessments of the rates, because we're talking about commercial business rates as they're called in the UK, we call them non-domestic for some reason, but actually the plain English explanation is commercial properties. So commercial properties are rated blind of the economic of the actual business that is undertaking of their use class. Now, I know that I'm going to hear from the Constable of St Mary, but she cannot get away from the fact of the truth, is that since there has been a fixing of attributes, the number of quarters for different types of premises has not changed. I know that because I've got one, and it hasn't changed. And so the Constable of St Clement's can remonstrate, but the reality is, sir, is that the fixing of attributes means that those sectors of the economy that have performed better and therefore have seen increased rent are proportionately better off than those that have seen their rents fall. And we have seen, well, constables are, I'm happy to give way, but I know my facts on this because I have been spending years, and I warned the Assembly when the very substance of this came into force in the new rates law, and I said that it was unwise not to put in place at least a quintennial review. And apparently, we know more about how to I celebrate the voluntary nature and want to keep absolutely the voluntary nature of our parochial system. Absolutely. There's nothing that I take more pleasure in than actually knowing that the parishes actually collect their rates with a zero cost with voluntary rates assessors. But those rates assessors' hands are tied, and they have to be blind to the economics. And that means there is unfairness. And over time, that has meant that those business sectors, such as retail and hotels, have seen their rates stay the same in terms of quarters. And those sectors who are increasing in value, like the finance industry, have seen their premises effectively not increase. And the end result of this, and this is a matter which affects St Helier far more than all other parishes, because it is the commercial heartland of St Helier, of the island, and I think that I'm correct in saying that 80% of all commercial quarters or non-domestic quarters are in St Helier. And so presumably the senior rates assessor of St Helier knows quite a lot about it, because he's actually overseeing the assessments of 80% of all of the island's rates, are effectively creating a distortion in the amount of rates they're paying. Now, we know that business rates are low in Jersey, and we welcome that, of course, as a cost of business. But nevertheless, they are still a cost which should reflect the economic value. We know that there are, for example, I don't believe that that was the chairman of the rates assessor, sir, but
it was a member of the public.
Yes,
in the
indeed,
public
sir.
gallery who escaped before I was able to find them.
Yes, indeed, sir. So I'm sure your ushers will be well on the case, sir, in this season of goodwill. And I want to offer some goodwill. I want to say to the constables, please take on board the arguments of value. The attribute system does not mean economic value. And how can it be right that for time immemorial, we do not seek to create a situation where we increase the quarters that are gathered from businesses that are in properties with higher rents, like, for example, the finance sector. It's extraordinary. The constables are opposing both the change and this revaluation, which I accept will cause some work, mostly in St Helier, but they have said that they want to do it and see the reason. And the constables are also opposing the states paying rates on their own property, much of which is commercial, by the way. Now, if the state is going to pay rates on its property, then I would have thought that it would be far fairer and far better for it to be looking at the economic side of the use of the property than this rather bizarre system of attributes. And if the system of attributes is so wonderful and brilliant, then I ask why I can't find another single jurisdiction that uses them. Moreover, why, for example, in the United Kingdom, that they update their rates assessment, which of course has an economic and business value, on the value which is rental. It seems absolutely sensible, sir. In fact, it is unfair not to have regard to the value of that commercial property. It works fine for houses because it's got the same use, so you can ascribe attributes. But I'm sorry, a premise that is in different commercial use must have an economic argument associated with it. Now, the good news is that if this amendment by the Treasury Minister is passed, it will yield an estimated increase in quarters. Some properties that have seen their rents fall, but whose rates assessment quarters have not changed, of which I could name quite a few because I have checked. I know I own one, sir. will mean that actually, that in terms of retail and hotels, their rates bill will fall. So what members are doing in not approving this article is they are voting in favour of a situation whereby the finance sector will pay more in business rates. Small businesses, retail businesses, who have seen their economic value of their premises fall, will be paying less rates under a revaluation based upon funding. Now, if any member thinks that that is wrong, then I look forward to hearing what their ratepayers have got to say about it, because it seems to me absolutely fair. Now, what I can say, sir, is that I have discussed this with a number of commercial landlords in St Helier, in the finance sector, which is the sector that I have ministerial responsibility for. And I have not had a single, when I've been through how the calculations worked, based upon the advice that I have been given by the rates assessor in St Helier about how this will be done, not a single one has said, no, I think that must be fair. Let us be clear, sir. Voting against this article is a vote which does not cut the business rates paid by small businesses such as retail and hotels. It's a vote against increasing the amount of rates that the finance industry, which is growing, will pay. It will also, to all those members of this assembly who want the states to pay rates, will mean that there will be no revenue as a result of this revaluation, which is entirely sensible, as I've explained. The winners and losers, there'll be a lot more winners. I hear somebody arguing, sir, but I think I'm right, and if I've erred in anything that I've said in interpreting the law, then I invite the Solicitor General to say why I am wrong, is that attributes do not relate to economic value. And I ask members to vote in favour of fairness. That's the word that is at the heart of our taxation system. And fairness must be fairness which is linked to value, not some obscure concept of attributes which works for residences but does not work for a variety of different commercial premises. Members need to really, I know it's difficult, but it's really important. And I also say that any member that wants to find a solution to the conundrum of the states paying rates are going to put the Treasury Minister almost in an impossible position, that the free money that will come largely from the finance industry in St Helier to pay those rates will not be able to be achieved. Sir, I urge members to support this article.
Right, St Mary.
Thank you, sir. I have to say, sir, I'm really not feeling very well, and I'm going to do my very best to keep this level-headed, but it's been very difficult to follow what's going on. Firstly, it's not. I think it's a red herring, shall we say, to tie this particular article about revaluation into the matter of the states paying rates on their properties. That comes in a different part of the law, and I don't believe that this is an absolute fundamental reason for doing, for going for revaluation. Actually, I'm not against the states paying rates on their properties per se at all. What I am against is the mechanisms that are being proposed in this for doing it. I think there is, and I know, because I've just double-checked this morning, that when the Constable of St Helier was continually taking up the cudgel for getting the commitment to pay rates, that this isn't really, I don't believe, this isn't what he was looking for. He was looking for a different solution to come forward from the Treasury Minister, but that's for him to discuss later. But sir, I can take it as fundamentally as this. Having listened very carefully to Senator Ozoff's speech, and this is where historically people say, and I like Senator Ozoff, His speech was an absolute vindication of the reason why this particular change should have been put as a standalone document in amendments to the rates law, because it is totally confusing to say we're going to tie this down to economic reasons and then to say, and that's all down to the rental value. No, it's not. The success and economic viability of a business is not necessarily reflected in the rate it pays. And I think that is something that is a red herring again. We're being led down this path, and I just don't think that the justification for what's being proposed has been explained. And to say it's simply economic, tying it to economic benefit, I just don't wash that. There was a very, very conscious decision taken by this Assembly to move away from rental values as the assessment for rates. And it was taken because the island had got itself, let's put it in no easy measure, it had got itself in a real muddle. Similar properties across the island had different rateable values. Similar properties within the parish had different rateable values. Huge drives were made to get parity within each individual parish. But then we found that across the island, a 3-bedroom semi-detached in one area was being rated in a completely different way in a different parish. And the rates assessors got together, and a rates assessment committee was formed. It was a big step forward. Because when the 1946 law came in, low inflation meant that rental incomes weren't changing a lot. Everything worked very well for a while, and that law actually fitted its time. But by the time we got to the 2000s, we were in complete, utter mayhem. The stability that's come into our parish rates since we changed the law has been incredible. I mean, I used to input the rates under the old law, and it would take me days upon days because every single year, every single rateable value changed. There was no consistency. Chasing up people who hadn't submitted on time was a nightmare because we didn't know, the information wasn't there. Now, if someone hasn't submitted in time, and if we can see that there's no change to the building, then there's no change to the attributes. Moving to attributes was a huge departure. And to be honest, sir, and it's not very parliamentary, but I'm going to use the word fig. I don't give a fig if we're the only people who do it. If it works here, then we should carry on using it. And if it's not working, if we need to review it, we should do so on the basis of a really comprehensive, hard think about it. Not just to say, oh yeah, let's just go for rental value. Because the work has not been done. I mean, the constables had very few meetings with the Treasury Minister's department over this. And I don't think that the comments that we put forward were actually taken on board. And that's why we've made very much the same comments again in the comments we've given to this law change. The chairman of the St Helier Rates Assessors and the Island Rates Assessors Group came to the constables on Monday morning this week to talk about it. And we had so many questions for him then. And, and I don't think the penny had really dropped that actually it was all going to change this week. Because there's a lot more work to be done. That became completely evident during the course of the committee discussions after that meeting, that really there's a lot of work to be done. If we are going to change, let's change properly after debate and after proper consultation and proper evaluation of exactly where the problem lies. Because it could be small businesses this week, it could be farmers next week. We don't know the Treasury Minister has been very passionate about small businesses. But actually, those small businesses are still making the same demands on the parish for infrastructure and for services as they would be making if they're profitable or not profitable. And the parish rates exist to fund the parish budget. Now, there is a mechanism for differentiating between commercial and non-commercial, or as we call it, domestic and non-domestic. That's in relation to the island-wide rate, where we know we're raising a certain amount of money and we have a mechanism to split the proportion of domestic and non-domestic to change the way that's attributed. And I think it was done once, I can't remember, but it used to be 55-45. We can weight that differently. There's a mechanism to do that. The discussion, I haven't heard anybody mentioning how that mechanism, but I fundamentally believe that the rates law as it is now, works. And that the mechanisms for discussing attributes and re-evaluation, if an attribute changes, for example, if a new kind of office block is built, building 4, I went round there, many of you went round there, many members went round there, the light per workstation is phenomenal. Everybody's, I think they call it a lux value or whatever, everybody's working in natural daylight, it's wonderful. That means an attribute can be created for that. You can measure the amount of light that people have. You can decide that buildings that have a fantastic environment for their workers should be rated more. So we can actually manipulate them, re-evaluate the attributes. If a change happens to a building, it's the owner or occupier's duty to note that change on the next rates form, and then the attributes are revalued. That works for property now. If there's been a change in the property, there can be a change in the assessment. If a new kind of building comes along, then it's just a matter of redefining the attributes. And I really believe that a mechanism exists now between the rates law, in the rates law to do that. And let's not forget one thing, the reason why rates are levied. The parishes are not unpaid tax collectors. And yet, I really feel that the reasons behind these changes have not been fully discussed and aired. And I really feel, I mean, I would have gone home. I felt so rotten yesterday, but I felt that this is so important. And I just regret, sir, that I haven't had the acuity to really focus on that, because I think, like many members here, we've all been laid low, many of us, with this bug. But I just fundamentally feel so strongly about this. This is not the way to proceed. If it needs to be changed, let's have the full discussion. Let's understand why we moved away from rateable values, because for many members in this assembly, they weren't around when that happened. I was around in a different life. I worked in inputting the rates. And I can tell members now that it was an absolute nightmare. And even if we have a partial revaluation by sector or whatever Senator Rosev might have in mind, the burden on the parish to do these changes has simply not been understood or factored into these discussions. And it's considerable. And I know that St Helier is having an awful time recruiting sufficient rates assessors to do what is admittedly the most onerous rates assessment tasks in the island. I think personally, sir, that the burden on parishes to recruit the rates assessment volunteers is going to increase dramatically, because I know how often members of the rates assessment team had to meet. And, I mean, I don't know what other constables find, but we rarely have any rates appeals within the parishes now. I can remember when there was a queue out of the door to come and see every year, because there were discrepancies and there were anomalies and there were arguments about this and that and the other. It was a really onerous task. So if things are difficult in recruitment now, I don't imagine how they'll be if we take this retrograde step. But more than anything, sir, I feel that this has been hidden away in a law which is normally very benign. And I don't think that this re-evaluation, if you're supporting states paying rates in St Helier by the mechanism that's proposed later, that doesn't have any impact on that. You can still do that. But I really fundamentally believe that this is not the time, and this is certainly not the place to be passing what is legislation that has unbelievably unintended consequences. And I really feel that it's being brushed under the carpet. And I hate to use the word, I use it in joke often when I say to my children, trust me, I'm a politician. but please, members, trust me. I've got no reason to say this if I'm not really, really concerned about this piece of legislation. And I really fundamentally believe that this has to be rejected. Thank you, sir.
Deputy Martin.
Yes, thank you, sir. And it's good to follow the councillors at Mary who like me, has the scarf on representing the 12 parishes. And here we are again. The Council of St Mary has told us that it's working. And she did, and it was a fraudulent slip, sir, said the law as it worked can go this and that, and you can manipulate. She did not mean to say manipulate. She meant to say, as she went on to explain, if you have a new building, you can then put better attributes to that building. But what about something that was rated 13, 14 years ago, just under this law, which when Senator Rousseff spoke, said, which has got to say the same, the Constable of St Clement's was saying, because it was fixed, and that is why. So who do you believe? It can never be changed. It was, in the words of, in 2003, when the figures were frozen for all time. And this I would like to read out, sir. It is from the rates assessor in St Helier. And he says, with domestic property, there are changes in prime areas for all sorts of reasons. To give two examples, sorry, non-domestic, sorry, sir. To give two examples in St Helier, and I am a St Helier deputy, but we are all supposed to work together for the island benefit. The levels of rents in King Street has decreased by about 30% as retail has deteriorated, and the prime office area has moved from Hill Street to the Esplanade. The law does not permit changes to be made just because a move of prime position. What this means is, although the parishes may only, and I fully understand what the Constable of St Mary is saying, may only raise such money as they need to spend in the year, plus any capital projects for which they have been approved by the parish assembly, the balance of payment is wrong. And in the two examples given, the shops in King Street will be paying too great a proportion of rate, and the office in the Esplanade too little. And as we say, we have, and Senator Rose has said it, St Helier has 80% of commercial rate. And some of that is not being rated sufficiently. Why should St Helier suffer again? Because sometime this has supposedly been buried and fixed for all time, frozen in time in 2003 when people were looking for something better than it was. Did we move to something a bit better? The Council of St Mary again says very few people appeal their rates. Well, I shouldn't think they do. In most of the parishes, they're less today than they were in 2003. I've got the figures. Why would you argue over a few pounds when literally you're paying the same as you were in 2003? So the argument of this is working better because no one's appealing it, doesn't stand up. We had an hour yesterday morning with the senior rates assessor, and it didn't take the whole hour to convince the St Helier deputies who were round the table that it can't carry on working like this. And as I say, we do need to get this moving. We need the support of the other 11 parishes because we, again, are suffering. We've always suffered under the rates law. Keep it the same and we will carry on suffering. But at the end of the day, it must filter down to you. If you want to see King Street, we lost Woolworths, then we lost BHS. Our shop centre manager has filled these places. Very short-term lease on the BHS one. But at the moment, there are shops we're putting, the people are putting the rents down. We can't put the rates down. How absurd. Absolutely absurd. But this is your town. It's your parishioners' town. Everybody in the island comes to this town. And they come here for the high street. And it is, as I say, many retails paying too much and prime office moves. Businesses have moved from Hill Street and they're paying too less. To me, that's a simple fact of it. Absolutely simple fact. And I can't carry on with this, sir. I'm here for fairness. We're always here about fairness across the board. Fairness, fairness, fairness. We've been having this argument. It's never been fair for St Helier. The rate system is still not fair. We're getting there. That will be a bit more to say on the next article, sir, but we do need this as well as the paper-to-pay rates, because we need to be collecting the right rates from the right people. And this exactly is what it will do what it says on the tin, sir. So I'll leave it there, but I really do hope that, you know, the 12 parishes can get together. It is such a shame that it's always St Helier out on a limb and not supported very much by the others. Thank you, sir.
Sir, I wonder if I could, arising from the Deputy speech, I could put a question to the Solicitor General?
Yes, you can certainly ask a question to the Solicitor General, yes.
Thank you, sir. There seems to be a conflict between what the Deputy of St Mary's has said and what Deputy Martin has said. As I understood it, the Constable of St Mary's was saying if there is a new attribute inserted into the rates law, then when the annual return of the rates are made, then presumably a new figure would be arrived at. But Deputy Martin has said that it can't, that if you already are paying a rate, it then can't be changed in the future. And I think I just would like some clarity that if there was a new attribute inserted into the rates law, when the annual return was made, that there would be a new figure, and therefore new businesses or whatever they had moved, therefore would be subject to that. Just so I'm clear.
Well, sorry, sir, and I'm not speaking for the constable. I thought the constable said if a new building with new attributes, yeah, the Solicitor General is nodding, not that you can put new attributes into an old building, into the law. I mean, I'm only remembering what she said, sir.
Deputy, this was a question for the Solicitor General, not an invitation to Mr. Solicitor.
Well, in view of my nodding, sir, it wouldn't be a surprise to say that I agree with what Deputy Martin has said. In terms of the way that the current rates law is drafted, under Article 3, to do with the maintenance of the rates lists, when the Conotab annually obtains information concerning properties, he's required to specify, or the ratepayer is required to specify any changes to the attributes of the land or to its use for domestic or non-domestic purposes that have occurred since the beginning of the rateable year. So the way I read that is that if there's been a change of use of the property, if it's changed from, say, retail use to residential use, that will be a change to the attributes of the land. But so that's different from a change, for example, in the economic value of that land in terms of whether a shop in King Street is worth as much as an office or another shop in the waterfront, for example. Those seem to be different things, and those don't seem to be caught by the definitions of attributes in the interpretation section of the current rates law. So.
May I thank the Solicitor General for that clarification?
Thank you, sir. And can I start by praising the Constable of St Mary for staying the course. She was so ill yesterday, I suggested she go home. But she has, and all credit to her, she has stayed the course so that she can make her points. I want to pick up on a criticism made by the chairman of the Committee of Constables when he said that the Treasury Minister hadn't properly explained himself with respect of the changes proposed to Article 16. And I refer members to page 3 of the comments by the Council of Ministers, which gives more than a page of explanation as to why the Council of Ministers believes that the ability to revalue commercial or non-domestic property is essential. And I have to say there is no linkage here between the revaluation that's proposed and the Council of Ministers' problem in finding the money to pay rates. There is no linkage in the comments, or indeed in the proposition. So the fact that some members may feel that Senator Ossoff in his speech was linking the two and saying we've got to have the revaluation in order to pay rates, that isn't true. And in fact, that's why one of the, I've forgotten how many, but one of the various iterations of the proposition, the state should pay parish rates, that I made in the last 15 years, one of them in 2008 I withdrew on the morning of the debate when Senator Lassoir, then Treasury Minister, proposed that, yes, the states will pay parish rates, and Part B, we will claw back all that income from the hapless ratepayers of the island. Of course, guaranteed to fail. And if that had been part of the Treasury Minister's proposal this morning, or in the budget, then I believe it would have been equally guaranteed to fail, and we would have kicked it out straight away. But what is the Treasury Minister actually asking us to do? If we look at the comments, and the last bullet point is perhaps the most important one, Article 16, and I quote, simply creates the opportunity to undertake a revaluation exercise. How it will be done and how regularly will be determined in regulations to be developed in partnership with the Comité des Connétables and the rates assessors, and ultimately agreed by the states. So what the Treasury Minister is asking us to do today is an enabling provision that will allow this work to go ahead, as I've said, in partnership with the constables, the rates assessors, and to be brought back to the states before that linkage, which we could all hear Senator Ossoff moving towards, that linkage in getting the money back from the ratepayers. That's not in the law at the moment. All the Minister is asking to do, as I say, is to carry out this revaluation. I was interested in some of the other remarks by the Constable of St Mary, who said that this is not going to affect her support. I think she said her support of Article 17, which is the states shall pay rates. Who knows, whether that's the case? And I think it's perhaps it's unfortunate, perhaps in the way this is being presented, that it looks like there is clearly a linkage between Article 16 and Article 17. I don't believe there is, and I hope that if this should be lost, and I hope it won't be, but if this should be lost in Article 16, I hope that members will respect the decision by the states about the states paying rates, and they won't use this as a springboard to allow them to vote against Article 17 too. And now, having stressed that this is purely an enabling provision to allow the work to be carried out in consultation with all parties, I do want to emphasise that the current system of rating non-domestic properties is extremely unfair. And I think the reason we've heard less from business about it is that I think a lot of them don't know, and actually, as Senator Ossoff said himself, non-domestic rates are so low in Jersey compared to the UK, certainly that the bigger firms who operate in St Helier probably just sign their rate checks without too much of a concern. But the firms I am concerned about it, and we've just heard clarification from the Solicitor General, that attributes won't wash when it comes to your business premises having suffered a massive fall in value. And you can't go along to the rates assessors and say, well, the attributes have changed. That won't wash. And so trading in King Street, trading in Columbury, even more importantly, you're paying too much rates. Hundreds of businesses in St Helier are overpaying, are overbilled for rates every year. And businesses down on the waterfront, down on the Esplanade, are laughing all the way to the bank because they're paying far less than they should. And the Treasury Minister is not asking members to correct that injustice today. He is asking us to allow that work to go ahead. So I would urge members to accept this enabling provision, and let's get on with the real debate, which has been a long time coming, about whether the state should pay rates. Thank you, sir.
Does any other member wish to speak on Article 16? Deputy Reilly.
Thank you very much, sir. I have to say that I am very concerned that these two articles have been inserted into the draft Finance 2017 Budget Jersey law. If we are to have a debate on the way in which the island as a whole applies rates, then let us have that debate. Because essentially what Article 16 of Part 2 of the law is saying is that we are actually going to be moving a fundamental move away from attributes to rental value on the way in which we apply rates. This is not enabling us
to have a look at the whole picture, to debate the whole picture. And I'm afraid, as someone who is not an expert in parish rates, or island-wide rate for that matter, it does come across, to me at least, as an attempt to just raise revenue. And it is purely about raising revenue, not what is best for all islanders. And because I am not expert in the rate system, or the island-wide rate, I certainly, and I would suggest to other members, that we actually do look to the constables for a lead on this. They are the experts on this area. They have a vast amount of knowledge in this area. I may not agree with everything that the constables stand for or say, but in this area, I personally will bow to their greater knowledge. And despite the Constable of St Helier's assurances that Article 16 and 17 are not somehow connected, I'm afraid, once again, I find that very hard to believe. I believe that Article 16, if approved, would provide the Treasury Minister with the thing that he has been searching for quite a while now, which is a funding mechanism so that the states can pay rates. I'm also concerned about the way in which we are continually compared to the way things are done in the UK. And Senator Ossoff, in his speech just now, compared us to the way in which the UK does things. Unlike some members, I actually do believe that the parish system we have should be maintained. And I would have to remind Senator Ossoff and the rest of the Council of Ministers that we are not part of the UK. We never have been part of the UK, and if I have my way, we never will be part of the UK. So I am going to support the constables on their stance on this article, because I think we need a much bigger debate on the overall rate system. Do we believe it should change? How should it change? What is the impact on people if we do make that change? And it is an important area, and I think that for us just to accept what is in Article 16 would be doing a disservice to the people of this island. Thank you, sir.
Does any other member wish to speak on Article 16? Deputy Lewis?
So I'd just like to maybe correct something that Deputy Breeder said. This is clearly not about raising extra revenue, it's about rebalancing, and I think lots of members have said that. And I'd like to go on briefly to reiterate what the Constable of St Helier was just saying about how much this will be later discussed with the Committee to Connotabs. And if you go on to page 4 of the comments, it clearly says here that the changes to the rates law is silent on how the revaluation should be undertaken. This will be determined at the time that regulations are developed. The Council of Ministers is committed to working with the Committee to Connotab, which is what was said earlier on by the Constable of St Helier, to ensure that the process of revaluation is reasonable and is practically deliverable within the context of the current rate mechanism. So they're going to be looking at the whole realm and bringing it back to the states. All this does today is give the ability to do that, to actually look at it closely and bring it back to the states and discuss it in much more detail with the constables. My slight concern here is that this hasn't happened to a greater extent already. That's a matter we can't go back, we are where we are, but perhaps it should have been, and we wouldn't be having this debate quite the same way we are now. But we are where we are. This is a step forward, in my view, as a representative of the people of St Helier, a deputy of St Helier. I can quite understand and completely agree with what Deputy Martin said. This is the time to reevaluate this and look at it more closely, in full consultation with the constables of all the other parishes. Absolutely. It's our town, all islanders' town, not just those that live and work here. But let's face it, most people work here, they don't live here. And it's up to us to sort this out so that there is fairness across the board. That's all this is going to do. And to say all, it's a really important step. And it will be done in full consultation with the constables of every parish. And that's only right. Sadly, it hasn't happened already, but there must be a good reason, I hope, and maybe we can learn from it. But this was all it does. And it will be brought back to the states, and I believe that's the right thing to do. But today, I think we need to approve this amendment so we can get on with that very important piece of work. Thank you, sir.
Any other member wish to speak on Article 16? Call on the Minister to respond.
Thank you, sir, and thank you to members for their comments. So the introduction of a revaluation mechanism has nothing to do with raising revenue, and I'd like to be absolutely clear about that. A revaluation mechanism will raise no additional revenue whatsoever, neither for the states nor for the parishes. So this law change is all about fairness and making sure that the burden of rates, both parish and island-wide rates, is shared amongst all ratepayers on an equitable basis. We have heard much mention about attributes, which are the basis on which rateable values in the island are, of course, set. We've heard that because rateable values are set by reference to attributes, and that attributes make no reference to the rental values, it must follow that rateable values have nothing to do with rental values, and hence that Treasury have misunderstood the rates law. So we have not. However, if you look back into the history of how rateable values were originally set in 2003, it quickly becomes clear that rental values are at the heart of the process. That's because when rateable values for properties were originally fixed in 2003, they were fixed by reference to the rental values that property would have achieved in 2001-2002. So what happens when a new property is built, or for that matter, an existing property is changed? The rates law is clear on the process. The rates assessors, having already acquainted themselves with the rateable value of other property in the island, and need to give the property the same rateable value as other properties in the island with the similar attributes. But we know that all those existing properties that the rates assessors have to acquaint themselves with had their rateable value fixed by reference to the rental values, as I've said, which were set in 2001 and 2002. This means that the rates law effectively results in all property in the island being valued by reference to its likely market rental from way back in 2001-2002. The result, sir, of the attributes approach is that all properties are being evaluated by reference to the market rental from that time. This isn't just the Treasury analysis. This is the analysis and conclusion reached by the chairman of the Association of the Jersey Rates Assessors. That's the basis for setting rateable values. Why is it unfair? Well, without doubt, the market rentals from that period, back in 2001 and 2002, have changed, in some cases, considerably, and that's not really surprising. For example, the prime locations for offices in town are no longer on Hill Street, but have gravitated down towards the Esplanade. However, under the rates law, there is no way of reflecting the change, no way of shifting the burden of rates more onto the prime office locations of today, resulting in offices in Hill Street being located in secondary locations but paying prime location rate bills. And that's simply not right. Another example is retail. 2001-2002 represents a time before, of course, internet shopping changed the whole makeup of the high street forever. But the rates law, in this way, acts as if the internet had never happened. We are still stuck for the purposes of rating those premises back in 2001 and 2002. And their rates bills that these retailers are paying are not surprisingly far higher than they should be, as the Constable of St Helier alluded to a moment ago. And again, as I've said, that's not fair. These issues of fairness can only be addressed through the introduction of a revaluation mechanism so that periodically rateable values can be reset, moving us away from that historic 2001 and 2002 so that we can reflect current market conditions. Accordingly, in order to address the current unfairness and prevent it arising again in the future, the Council of Ministers believes that the rates law needs to be amended in order to allow this revaluation to take place on a periodic basis. This article, Article 16 of the Finance Law, is silent on how the revaluation should be undertaken. It just creates a power to introduce regulations under a revaluation, which a revaluation will take place. Exactly how and when the revaluation will take place will be determined at the time that the regulations are developed. The Council of Ministers is committed to working with both the Comité and the island's rate assessors to develop the wording of these regulations, ensuring that the process for revaluation is reasonable and practically deliverable. Sir, Senator Rousseff might be right about some of the comments that he was making earlier on, but I would say to members he will only be right if members of this Assembly ultimately agree, and that's what it comes down to. Because in the end, the opportunity to review the proposals, the regulations when they come forward, and indeed to amend them and agree the final regulations will be for this Assembly. No one underestimates the challenges of agreeing and drafting those regulations, nor, I may say, the practical challenges that will result from the revaluation process itself when it's finally determined. However, this is preferable to a rates law that creates unfairness by locking in rateable values determined from back in 2001 and 2, remaining the case in perpetuity. How can we, it's bad enough, I might say, sir, to be in the position today. Do we want to continue to leave ourselves in the position where that revaluation is based on figures of rents from 2001 and 2002? Property revaluations for rates purposes are carried out in jurisdictions across the globe, and hence there is much that we can learn from the successes and otherwise of other jurisdictions in this matter. Sir, I would ask members to support this article, Article 16. Thank you, sir.
Oh, please.
The appel is called for. I invite members to return to their seats. The vote is on whether or not to adopt Article 16 of the Finances Law on a second reading. Ask the greffier to open the voting. Members have had the opportunity of voting. I ask the greffier to close the voting. Article 16 has been adopted. 22 votes pour, 17 votes contre, no abstentions.
Could we have the votes for and against, please?
Those voting for, Senators Osoph, McLean, Farnham, Balash, Green, the Conotab of St Helier. Deputies Martin, Southern, Hilton, Trinity, Noel, Higgins, Pinnell, St Martin, Bryan, St Peter, Mesick, Andrew Lewis, Labby, Norton, St Mary and Truscott. And those voting contre, Senator Ferguson, the Conotabs of St Clement, St Lawrence, St Mary, St Juan, St Brelard, St Martin, St Saviour, Juvenile, St John and Trinity. Deputy Kevin Lewis, Deputy of St John, Masson, St Juan, Bree and MacDonald.
So may I propose adjournment?
Adjournment is proposed. The State stands adjourned until 2:15.